implications from running a church is relevant to all church leaders. Yeah? So you cannot just say, well, today is church and I'm going to forget about everything else. Church is an organization, and any organization has implications if you run it. And what we want to take a look at today is look at some critical issues that's surrounding churches from a German perspective. And you are here, I would assume, because you do have an obligation from your church to protect them. Yeah? You're stewards of your churches, of the finances, of the budgets. I mean, this is God's kingdom, and He's given us the responsibility, to manage it, and to manage it in a responsible way. And you can only do that if you know what your obstacles are, what your requirements are. And that's what we're going to walk through today in a little bit more detail. I would like to briefly introduce the Council of Trustees, because the Council actually does have a role in the life of many churches. We are part of the International Baptist Convention. We are an advisory body to the convention and its executive council on legal aspects of the operation and employment of personnel. We're also involved in the acquisition and disposal of material assets, including real estate, and we're handling the supervision of the audit, the annual audit of the IBC accounts. And we are 4 members. There's actually 3 of us are here today, so that is Manfred, Stuart, and myself. In addition, we have Sigrid. Siggy is from Stuttgart. And another member is Bernd Prinke. He represents the Bund, so the German Baptist Federation in the IBC. And Bernd is always a very helpful person, because he's also a member of the board of the Bund-owned bank. So if we want to do Christian-style banking and get loans at good rates and have everything done with a minimum of bureaucracy, he is the one to turn to, and his bank is actually the one to help us in many respects. So, now, very quickly, this used to be a very important slide a couple of years ago, when for many churches it was still unclear. But I think the churches we have today are all members of the German Baptist Federation, right? You're not? What's your status?
EV.
You're an EV. Do we have any churches that have nothing? No, okay. So I don't want to talk into details. There's a few slides behind that actually walk through that, but I think most churches know where they are. Basically, legally, you can have any of the 3 status that I pointed out here. You can be an unincorporated association. That is just a gathering of people that say, we are a church today. That applies actually for every house church. And that is fine as long as you're just meeting for a Bible study. But the moment you're getting finances involved, so someone is paying and someone is managing those finances, that is when it's getting complicated. When you then buy assets, it gets even more complicated, because then you get into purchase contracts and all kinds of issues. And then quickly the question arises, who is responsible if anything goes wrong? Who has the liability to pay if someone orders stuff, and so on. And that is critical when you have a loose organization. The registered association, that's a very liberal translation, because the EV is a typical German acronym, and the Eingetragener Verein, that's what it means, is something that you have in Germany, maybe in Austria or nowhere else. That is at least a standard legal type of setup, which is better than the other part. That's why it got a yellow dot. And from my perspective, the most optimum type of organization from a legal and finance perspective, at least that's what I'm going to be talking about, is being part of the German Baptist Union or German Baptist Federation. Never know how to translate it. The The short form is BEFG. It stands for Bund Evangelisch-Freikirchlicher Gemeindekörperschaft des öffentlichen Rechts. So the name is, when I write it, about that long, which is why I'm either going to call it BEFG or Bund. The two short versions. The benefit there, to make it briefly, it's a you have a legal status as if we were actually a government body. So we are sovereign in the things that we do as a church, but we're not sovereign when we do things that are not part of the church. That is the short version. Being part of the Bund brings the big benefit that we're being protected by the Bund itself as a legal body, but it also brings certain obligations, because as a member of the Bund, we also have to help finance the Bund, and we have to adhere to some of their legal requirements, which sometimes is creating a bit of conflict between the Bund and churches. But what I've learned so far in dealing with them is I've never seen an organization that is more fair and respectful and humble than the Bund itself. So, by the way, if at any point I'm too fast, slow, or if you have a question, just let me know. So, you see here there's all types, there's a couple of very detailed slides, but I intentionally don't want to walk through them. We can come back to them at the end, but since we have quite a lot of material to cover, I preferred just to jump more into the details. So now, one of the questions is actually, what is a church? What's the definition of a church activity, and how do you separate? Because a church does many things. The typical thing that everyone thinks about a church is Sunday morning church service. Yeah, that is actually the easy part. But we see here there's coffee being made. I would not be surprised if ICF sometimes takes money when they sell coffee, or they have people baking cakes and the cakes are being sold. You have that? Sometimes? Okay, so you have that sometimes. So is that still a church activity? Because actually, is it different if I buy my piece of cake in a church or if I buy it at the bakery? So we're going to talk about that a bit more. Now, non-church activities, there is actually, I was looking a bit at some stuff from the US. I should have changed my wording, but since we're not only Americans here, the Americans might know the term. Has any one of you been dealing in the US with a US tax-exempt organization ever? No one? You? Okay, what would be the appropriate translation for non-church activities? I was looking at the IRS would call it unrelated business. Yeah, and that is actually also in the US. They clearly distinguish between what does the tax-exempt organization do, and Judith Lin is going to talk a little bit more about US-style tax exemption, and what is the church activity. You could also call it the sovereign activity, because churches are sovereign in some respect. And that has an impact. Mainly, where it mostly hurts us is the activity itself might become taxable for the church. And that can be income tax as well as VAT, so German sales tax. But it can also have an implication on the donation receipts that we issue. Most of our churches, I would assume, are issuing donation receipts because most of the members are German tax residents, and they can get a tax break for donating to the church. Now the question is always, what is a donation and what is not a donation? We'll get to that also in more detail. Now, before we separate out what's church activities, non-church activities, so what is sovereign and what is unrelated business, it always helps to take a look at the textbook. And the nice thing is there's one German law that is actually translated officially into English. And I was using that one, and I'm quoting here section 52 of the General Fiscal Code of Germany. For the Germans under you, that's the Abgabenordnung. We do have many other tax laws in Germany. There's an income tax law, there's a corporate income tax law, there's a VAT tax law, there is a real estate transfer tax law, there is a real estate tax law. There is quite many. My textbook on just tax laws is about that thick, and that's extra thin pages like in the Bible. So our tax laws have definitely more pages than the Bible, and probably 10 times more words. It is a challenge to keep up. Now, here it says that is actually the definition of a typical church activities is not finally clear because churches themselves are not mentioned in the tax law. So what we find there for tax-exempt organizations is this, that corporations shall serve public benefit purposes, and that is those are the exempt organizations. If it's activities dedicated to the altruistic advancement, so you're doing something for others without getting anything in return, of the general public, and that's going to be very important. General public means whatever you offer, you have to offer it to everyone. If you're doing it for a very limited circle, that can be harmful, especially when we talk about benevolence. And it says in material, spiritual or moral respect. And it shall not be deemed an advancement of the general public if the group of persons benefiting from such advancement is circumscribed. Now that's a very technical translation, means if we do, say we support people in need, but we provide the support only to members of the church, so it's a prerequisite that you're a member of the church, then we're not supporting the general public, and we're actually the group that's benefiting from the church's support is circumscribed, is limited. And that is when the church is actually violating restrictions given by the tax law. And there is another section in the paragraph where it lists all types of activities that tax-exempt organizations can follow. There is included sports, there's political parties in there, and many other things. And one of them is the advancement of religion. And that's actually important for the Eingetragener Verein. They need to have something that says we are advancing the Christian religion, and that's our purpose. Now, the one thing that's very important is that the tax offices in the various states have started some years ago to put more emphasis on looking at sovereign tax-exempt organizations, specifically churches, in order to determine are those in all their activities are just churches, or do we have substantial unrelated business in there that could become subject to taxes. It actually started originally not in churches, but it started in government organizations. So towns and all that. One big dispute was years ago when a town owns a kindergarten. Do they have to charge sales tax, VAT, on the kindergarten fees, yes or no? And actually the outcome was yes, they do have to, because they are competing with their kindergarten against privately run kindergartens, which are much more common today than they used to be decades ago. Now the next question is then, okay, does that have an impact on us as churches? Because we are, in a way, similar like a town from a legal perspective. Yeah, and we also have, some of us have kindergarten. Faith, you have preschool, right?
Over here.
You have a preschool and you have a school. Yeah. So there it is a question, is that actually subject to tax? And now the nice thing is that sometimes it's tough when the government gets involved and is looking more in detail, and in that case it helps because they put out a list of activities where they separate out what is church and what is non-church, and what we find there, examples of church activities are actually kindergarten run by a church. So it's different if you have a kindergarten that's part of a church, And if you have a kindergarten that is part of a town, city, or whatever, they're viewed differently so far by the tax authorities. And that is because the kindergarten is actually, from a tax perspective, or from a legal perspective, a vehicle to transport religious beliefs, religious education into the congregation. Yeah? So that is more, that's why it's viewed as being part of the church activities rather than the non-church, because the religious training, the teaching is more relevant there than the childcare aspect in that. Same applies for daycare centers. Yeah? I mean, there's daycare centers, you don't need to have a church to have a daycare centers, but that is the specific obligation of a church to take care of others, which is why many daycare centers, also senior citizen homes, hospitals, medical services, or meal services and social care are run by church organizations. We have in Germany very prominent the Caritas and the Diakonie, as being from the Protestant church and from the Catholic church, and that's been driving that they say, okay, we make a separation there, even though it's a very commercial type. I mean, if I do meal service, and it's like running a business. Yeah? I cook meals, put them in a truck, distribute them, get money for that and all that. But it has a very social aspect, and it is supporting the advancement of and providing sort of equality also to the society as a whole. And this aspect is much in the foreground, and that is why the government is very actively giving churches lots of freedom in doing activities outside running church services, Bible studies, and so on. On the other hand, there are clearly those unrelated businesses when you do a church bazaar. Yeah? Many churches run, and we do that in Düsseldorf typically in the Advent season. We do an Advent bazaar, and we're selling all types of things from jellies, marmalades, knitted stuff, and Christmas decorations and all that. And we take the money and use it for a good purpose. Support missionaries, support our own church services and activities. Now, however, that sales process in there is clearly an unrelated business. The same thing applies if you run a cafeteria, if you have a kiosk. Travel organization, you would probably not find that often. Second-hand job could be very easily run by a church, or a bookstore. Most of our churches do have a little small bookstore somewhere in the corner where you can buy Bibles, Bible study materials, postcards, nice birthday greetings and all that. And that is actually a so-called unrelated business. Now, don't get scared right away, because it does not become per se a taxable item or something that needs to be treated separately if it's very small. And mostly for our churches, those activities are very small. Let me throw out a number already, 17,500 in terms of revenue. If you don't exceed that annually from such type of activities, then you don't have to think about it anymore. You can lean back and sleep through the part of my presentation when I'm talking about that. As long as you do have 17,500 straight in your mind.
17,500.
So I've
got one question on that. Does it matter where the money goes to?
No.
And I'll give you an example. Sometimes we have a band playing Christian music in our church, and they take a donation or they sell their CDs, but it's towards their costs. So the church don't touch it, doesn't come to our books, it goes straight to them, and
that is always a bit critical. The question is, what you got to make sure that you do not replace an activity that you're doing by their activities. If you're allowing them to sell their own CDs, they bring it, they purchase it, they sell it, and they record all the income. That is typically fine, because it's their activity. But as soon as the church is getting involved and the money is running through the church, they would have to record it. And it's like the typical example would be the ticket sales. Yeah? If you're ticketing people to run a concert, and you run it on your ground, and you as a church organize the concert, then you have the revenue from the tickets, even if the proceeds are going to, first of all, pay for the concert, and maybe everything that's left over is going to commissions or anything else. It is still the proceeds from the concert, from the ticket sales, is what counts in that respect.
Okay.
You could then theoretically go around it. You could say you're going to leave the church to the band, and the band organizes itself. But that's pretty hard to make sure, because you would, in theory, have to give them the key and say, now, here's the key, you pay for the premises, and you're responsible for all. But mostly you do have church personnel being involved, doing the ticket sales, promoting the whole thing, and you cannot say you're just renting the premises for a concert.
But you mentioned ticket sales and being involved, you split the two out. I mean, we never have ticket sales, but clearly, we participate and somebody like that opens the door. Will that be counted towards if there's no ticket sales, just donation, and we don't sell?
No, that's different. That is actually, you're going to see that later in the recommendations. If there's no ticket sales, and that is quite often, and you say the concert is free, and you're going to go around and take donations, and they're really, but they have to be really, it has to be a free will offering. You're not giving it in order to see the concert. Sometimes organizations try to get around and say there is a recommended giving of 15 euros. Yeah? And when you see that recommendation is put forward so strong that it becomes like a sales price, then it is a sales price. But we had concerts in our church that were completely free, and there was no recommendation, nothing. It was actually not even announced that there would be donations, offerings taken, and we would just give the donation bag around. It was anonymous, nobody would know who was giving what, and then it actually is separate. You do have, like in any other church service, donations, and that concert is then not.
So can I have two more questions? Another example is sometimes we have youth selling food for a youth trip to IBC activity, whatever. Also, that doesn't go through our books. The youth make the food, they sell it, and they take the money. Does that count towards 17,000 or not?
Yes.
So we should actually then make sure that we count the money. And
ideally, if you want to do it correctly, it is actually the youth organization is part of your church, and they're doing that as being part of the church, and so it should be counted. I know it is quite often done that way. It's typically also relatively small activities involved, but you also always got to see, when I say the principle, I'm stating the principle irrespective of the size. And a one-time food sale that generates 100 euros, nobody's going to be concerned about if that money is going to church activities in any ways. But as a principle, yes, it is official, and if you want to do it 100% right, you have to report the money and say that is a dedicated donation, it's actually going for a specific purpose, which also means quite often if the ones, because then there are people that are coming, well, I just bought that and I paid for a piece of cake 5 euros, because I wanted to give some extra, can I have a donation receipt? Yeah, and the answer is no. So they got something in return. They got, first of all, a piece of cake, and if you buy something, then you can't get, then it's not a donation anymore. And second of all, quite often, some of the money is being used for things that are not typical church, and that's always pretty. But you will have requests quite often to have donation receipts for literally everything. But I can also talk about examples for that, what I have seen in the last 10 years.
So I have one more question in general. Any kind of rental income, like a church approaches ICF and says, we'd like to use your facilities and we'll give you money for it.
Yeah.
Or there's an apartment that's being rented to a church member. Does that fall into this category as well?
The rental income is separate, because you do have 3 types of income in general. The one type of income is from your sovereign activities, so that's the donations, tithes, and so on. This is totally untaxable. The second part is property income, so that's investment income, and that can be not only from investment in securities, but that's also investment in real estate, And if you do own real estate and you have rental income from that, that is also tax-free then. And does not count towards
Tax-free.
that because
But
rental
only-
income,
Tax-free.
tax-free.
Oh,
The rental income is tax-free.
Because of your status as a church, you mean?
Yes,
oh,
as long as you're a church, not,
Yeah.
not
I mean,
Individuals, it's not.
For example, we have an apartment building
Yeah.
that we bought across the street from our church. So that income, and there's 5 apartments in there. So that income that we receive would be considered tax-free.
Yeah, because that income is going towards the church,
Okay.
and that is tax-free, and you're not filing a tax return.
We haven't been.
No. I hope not.
It's because the church have taken their money and put it into that building,
Yeah.
and therefore they're allowed to have the return on that investment.
Yeah.
Because their money's tied up in that building, that's the rationale,
Yes,
I guess.
it's all types of investment income.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as you don't turn the investment into business, and that's always careful. So rental income so far is considered investment income, and therefore it's tax-free.
So if you have a church hall and you rent it out for somebody to have a private party, that's also tax-free.
That's where it's getting critical, because that is not the normal rental, that's actually actively managing, but it would be
Or it's fall
no,
into the
that one,
17,500.
if you rent out, if it's a short-term rental,
For one
it's
night.
different from an investment.
Okay.
So if you do have apartments that are long-term rent, if you would use the apartments and do short-term rentals for 1, 2, 3 months maximum on people that are just visiting temporarily, it's like a hotel operation. And that is then actually an active business income. Whereas if you have either an apartment or an office building, and you do have a long-term rental contract, that is rental income, and that rental type income is tax-free. for a
And
church.
so if you have this short-term income, does this count towards your 17,500?
That counts, yeah, exactly. So that is different.
I mean, in the end, even if you exceed the 17,500, okay, it just means you have to pay some tax, but it doesn't prevent you from doing it. You just have to account for it. Is that correct?
That's correct. You are allowed to do, it's actually, it does not, the activities you do, as long as you still do your sovereign activities as well, you can have all types of businesses in your church. You could run a whole corporation from the church. Yeah, and that would be a separate business, that would be viewed separately, that would have to do proper accounting, bookkeeping, that would have to do annual reports, everything, and file tax returns and everything, even though it belongs to the church. And you do have that. When you look at the big churches in Germany, just look at the Catholic Church. They used to own a publishing company, Weltbildverlag. I mean, that thing went bankrupt in the end, but it was a publishing house, and it had bookstores all over Germany. Some are still there. And that was a commercial operation of the Catholic Church in Germany. And that part of the operation was taxed as any other enterprise. And they actually did the right thing. They put that in a separate legal entity outside the church in order to make it easier. But for smaller businesses, typically it's getting too expensive to have a separate legal entity being defined, so you do it within. And bigger churches do have commercial activities.
So just to be 100% sure, ICF or the board actually just purchased this building. It has an apartment in it, and it's being rented for a nominal charge to a church member. That is definitely tax-free, just to make sure. Okay.
Up to 17 and a half.
No.
No.
Or
Yeah,
complete.
Oh, just
totally,
okay.
that is outside.
As long as it's
It's
long-term.
not counting towards the 17.
So you have 3 categories if I got it right. You have your sovereign income that comes from everybody donations and stuff.
Yes,
You have your property investment incomes, and then your turn 1 are your commercial activities.
yes,
Right?
absolutely correct. The only issue you could get at is, no, actually, I was just thinking if you're renting it at a very nominal amount, if you're not providing a free benefit to someone, that could hurt you elsewhere, but actually that's the one way you could really do it. It's just very critical because you're giving something away for, if you take a nominal rent and not a market type rent, you do create more internal issues. Why is this person getting it and the other person is not getting it? Who's the needy one? But we'll talk about that in the context of benevolence a little bit more later on. So, now a couple of questions you should always ask yourselves is, when we talk about the legal status, and that's supposed to wrap it up a bit, are you aware of your legal status of what you are? So I've seen so far, I think our churches know what they are. They know their types of incorporation. Have the consequences of your legal status ever been discussed? So if you're actually new in your function, in the leadership of your church, the one thing you should really ask around is like, is everyone around the table aware what we are, what it means to be a church, what the legal prerequisites are, and what the financial implications, tax implications are? And if you get a lot of blank faces and a lot of question marks, you should really encourage your leadership team to think about more and maybe do something internally, maybe invite someone like me to run a short version of this presentation, or you do it for them. And are you aware, because that's another part, not everyone is really aware what the church is doing, what are the church activities. There might be actually a lot of things going on, and not everyone knows what is going on in the church. I mean, many of us, even if we're in leadership positions, quite often we're in the church one day per week, now Sunday, but we have no idea what others are doing Monday through Saturday in the premises. I mean, we had situations at church building that someone said, oh, if you want to do something here, yeah, come, our premises are free. Yeah, you can just use it, or transfer some money to the church and that'll be all right, and nobody knows about it. Now, someone should ask the question is, does that have implications in terms of liability, insurance? What happens if an accident happens to someone who is unsupervised using a church building? All those questions. And some of these areas we'll cover now in the following parts. Let me start with the legal formalities. I'm trying to get the legal stuff away because I'm not a legal expert, I'm a finance expert, so and let's talk about representation. Who is actually representing a church? Yeah? When a church goes outside, the church also needs to buy toilet paper and cleaning materials. Sometimes they have to recruit someone, personnel. You do have a cleaning lady that's coming that wants to have a contract. Who is allowed to sign those contracts, and who can act on behalf of the church? Even more critical it gets when the church buys real estate. So you just bought real estate, who was signing your contract? The purchase contract?
Carsten and Manfred.
Carsten and Manfred. So you and your pastor.
Yeah.
You signed the contract in front of the notary.
Yes.
And
There's a special
okay.
Vollmacht for that.
Yes, in the Bund, because we are in the Bund.
Okay, so very important. They signed the contract, but they needed a special authorization, a power of attorney, in order to purchase that piece of land. And so who is typically representing a church? Taking it from our church, as a Baptist church, we're very typically basic decisions are very much driven by, or my understanding always, those churches are very much driven by the church body. Yeah? A church is a gathering. Everyone has the same rights and responsibilities in theory. When I look at the historical churches, there were strong leaders. I mean, the strongest was probably Paul, but he also put other people in place who were taking on a leadership role, like Timothy. But you could also tell that those were very small congregations where everyone was taking on some sort of responsibility. Now, when it gets bigger, that needs to be more formalized. However, it's still, all of our churches do have annual meetings, and there's always decisions that need to be taken by the church body. Typical decisions are who approves the budget and who decides who the pastor is going to be. So, and I don't know what your voting requirements are, but we have, for instance, to call a pastor, 75% of the members do have to agree to that. And I know that a good call of the pastor is if he gets 90% plus of the votes. which means that there's a very strong argument for a strong church body. But you also do have the church body cannot take every decision. So if our toilet paper is empty, you cannot call a business meeting and say, I need a vote so that I can go as the person who's taking care of it. I need a vote so that I can buy toilet paper. And actually, when you look at some of the church constitutions, our old constitution was written in that way, that in theory, just to buy a roll of toilet paper, we would need a business meeting and take a decision, because there was no authority given to anyone to do anything. Okay, and practically we did it differently, and finally we rewrote our constitution so that now we're handing down responsibility to certain functions within the church, and that is called the leadership. Our leadership is split into two parts. We do have an administrative part in the leadership, and we have the spiritual part, which is our elder team. But that is differently from church to church. But it should be, the one thing you should make sure, take a look at your constitution and say, do you have a definition of your leadership team and what their roles and responsibilities are? For us, what I find quite often is that the pastor is in a leadership role. Officially, he's not just teaching and mentoring, but he's also leading. The treasurer is very often a very important person, and they're always members also of the leadership team, irrespective of who else is voted in. And then you have 3 or more members at large that are being elected by the congregation in addition to form a leadership team. Does anyone have anything specific that deviates largely from what I just talked? Any best practice? Say we have the perfect solution how to run a church? Well, also not good. Let's leave it at that. But now what's also very important is we just talked about the POA, and that is as soon as someone is going outside the church, it is important, and that applies to all the churches that are members of the German Baptist Union, because we are part of that bigger operation. Officially, our representatives of our churches can only sign contracts and act on behalf of the church with a power of attorney from the Bund, from the BEFG. And that is because we are part of the Bund, and actually only the ones that are on their top level are officially representing all churches in Germany. Now, practically that is done through these power of attorneys. They give the power of attorneys to the church leaders of every single of their membership churches. There is a general power of attorney that allows you to open a bank account and to do any type of transactions, the normal day-to-day business. And then there is the specific power of attorneys that you need, especially when it comes to purchasing real estate. And that has to do, because purchasing real estate requires a totally different formality. Yeah? You have to have a contract that is authorized by authorized by a notary, a public notary here in Germany, and the contract has to be registered with the court of law. And that is why they want to make sure that all people involved in there or all organizations are properly represented. Why is that on the other hand also important? Because if I go out, I'm in the church leadership team and I'm acting without power, that could actually lead to a personal liability, because the church, if it is bad-willed, if I'm the black sheep of the church and I did something wrong, they could always say, well, you did not have the authority to do that. So, and if I bought not only one bag of toilet paper, but 1,000 bags, and the church says, well, we never wanted you to buy 1,000 bags of toilet paper, then I'm going to be personally stuck with that toilet paper and no idea what I'm going to do with those 1,000 bags. So before you order big time, think about it, are you properly authorized? That could backfire. I know German churches normally are not like that. They would then always try to accommodate and find a place for the 1,000 bags of toilet paper that were erroneously being ordered. But things have gone wrong in the past, and you know, when you place order through the internet, there have been instances where people, not in the church environment, but have ordered accidentally quadruple of times of the amount that they wanted to, whatever, just hitting the wrong button or placing the ticket the wrong place in an internet order form. And things have gone wrong. I remember I worked for a bank on the side. Not too long ago, we had a transaction where someone was supposed to transfer 230,000 euros from one account to another account. Instead, made an error on the entries and instead transferred 23 million. So, fortunately, the money never left the building, but it was a very ugly situation. And things have gone, the banking world has good examples. There was, some of you might remember, 2007 was a big banking crash. There was was that 2007, the Lehman Brothers incident, yeah, where they, with a certificates business, rent fell, Lehman Brothers went belly up, and there was a German bank that owed Lehman Brothers money. And at a time when they should have not transferred it, they transferred the money. I think it was 7 million euros. Paid by another German bank that was gone down the drain because someone made a mistake. Now, that person was probably authorized, did it as part of his job, was just a bit sleepy that morning when they hit the button, the OK button, so was protected, as it was an organizational fault. If he would have done that without authority on his own, I'm sure his employer would have sued him, would have asked to please pay back the 7 million. And anyone who has a normal income knows what that means. Now, Judith Lynn, you want to talk to us a little bit about 501c3 and other U.S. nonprofits?
As some of you may know, the U.S. banking system has gotten a lot tighter in the last few years, and they're becoming more strict as to foreign entities having bank accounts. The IBC's actual bank account was closed by our U.S. bank account, and 2 other IBC churches also had their accounts closed. So we were scrambling to find a place where we could have our U.S. dollar accounts for a couple of months as we were looking. There are 2 different types of nonprofit definitions for the U.S. Businesses. There is a nonprofit is simply a not-for-profit legal entity. You can be a nonprofit in the U.S. without having tax-exempt status. And you can be a nonprofit. One of the advantages to being a nonprofit is that you can then apply for an employer identification number, which then U.S. banks will use it as a way of saying you are a U.S. entity and can open a U.S. bank account. But you cannot issue tax contribution letters. You are simply defined as a nonprofit and you are recognized as a U.S. entity, but you cannot issue tax contribution letters. To do that, you need to be a 501c3 organization. Now, 501c3 is actually the section of the IRS code, but it has become synonymous with being a tax-exempt organization in the U.S. So that's sort of the difference between a nonprofit and a 501c3. Becoming a 501c3 is a complicated process and should not be done without the help of an attorney. It's a long process and you have to do a lot of things. Now the good news is IBCM, the International Baptist Church Ministries, has already done that work for us as international churches. They are a 501c3 organization. They have filed all the paperwork with the IRS, and all you have to do is join their work by filling out a very simple 1-page grant application once a year. How that works is that any of your U.S. citizens who would like to donate and get a tax donation letter would actually send their money to IBCM. IBCM processes that money and then offers you, as the church, a grant. And they send the money either once a month or twice a month to you for your income. They issue all the tax donation letters, so you don't have to do that work. And they, the other good news is, well, sort of the bad news first, is that they charge you 1.5% of the money that they receive as a processing fee, as an administration fee. The good news is that over the past 10 years, I think that they've been in existence, that money has come back, part of that money has come back to the IBC and to IBC churches. Because what they don't use of that 1.5%, they offer then as grants to churches in addition to the money that has been received for the church. So the IBC has gotten some money to help pastors go to conferences. Darmstadt just got some money to help with our new university student ministry, and that's above what has come in for directly designated for Darmstadt. So if you want more information about IBCM or being a nonprofit, let me know, and I've got information. I got information on how you can become a nonprofit. Being a nonprofit, in some states, you can do it very easily. In some states, Texas is one of the states you can become a nonprofit almost overnight. Florida, on the other hand, is very difficult to become a nonprofit. So we have a person in Texas who is a lawyer and a CPA, and he will help us get that done. If you need to become a nonprofit for banking purposes or for other purposes, but just understand, once you are a nonprofit, you can't just issue tax donation letters. You have to have that additional 501c3 status to do that.
Do you think, why would a church want to have a non-profit existence in the US other than using this service?
Only if they need to have a U.S. bank account.
Okay.
That would be the primary thing, if they need it to be a U.S. bank, if they need it for opening up a U.S. bank account.
But for us, the IBCM route has worked pretty well over the years.
Right.
Yeah, us too.
There are just some churches that are, Kaiserslautern being one of them, who has a lot of money coming in dollars, and so they've chosen to have a U.S. dollar account too. So that's that would be the key thing, is if you needed to have a U.S. bank account and you are having trouble getting one as a foreign entity. Any other questions?
Actually, if anyone is interested, I've taken the liberty yesterday to, 2 days ago. But let me take a look, how difficult is it really to set up a US non-profit and tax-exempt organization, so 501c3 type? And there is a little, there's a part of the IRS webpage that says, it's titled Life Cycle of a Public Charity. And it explains to you what you need to observe in order to start a nonprofit, and in order to get it registered, in order to do it all right, and in order to get the IRS thing and the filings you have to make with the IRS. So it's a 5-page just process chart on what you have to do. So if anyone is interested to see how things are being done in the US, take a quick look. Quite interesting, but very detailed, so very well done by American friends. Just to come back, why would you need it? One thing that Judith Lynn explained was if you want or need a US dollar account and you want to maintain it in the US, because you could also have a US dollar account here with your German bank, or many German banks offer that. The second one that is typically is if you do have people that are not German tax residents, so if they give to your church here in Germany and you issue them a German donation receipt, they cannot use it in their US tax return. Yeah, doesn't do them any good because it's not accepted in the US. So those people typically want to give their money in the US and get a US donation receipt, and that is where IBCM comes into play. It's a very easy process for them to give. They just donate and they say for the benefit of and name the church. IBCM collects the money and then transfers it to the church. The church treasurer also gets an information who it is from. So there is some level of transparency. The one thing is, if you're the treasurer, it's very important. If IBCM is receiving the money, only IBCM can issue a US donation receipt. You can give a German donation receipt only to IBCM, but they don't require it. So you don't need to do anything with it. And you cannot issue, in addition, a German donation receipt for any foreign donations that you receive from outside or that you receive via a different organization outside of Germany. So we can only issue donation receipts for direct donations received. So the individual has to pay to the church on the church's bank account or in cash in order to get a donation receipt. Just want to make that very clear.
Volker, should we take a short break since we're going to a new subject?
Thank you, Dr. Flynn. So, quick break, stretch your legs, get something to drink.